Well, today's devotion comes from 1 Kings, chapter 18, and we'll start in verse 20, where we see Elijah challenge the prophets of Baal. Now, I encourage you to read through the passage a few times on your own. You can press pause and then just come back when you're ready. And here I'd like to highlight a few interesting tidbits to help you along on your devotion today. For example, in verse 21, the English Standard Version translates the Hebrew word posachim as limping. But in contrast, the King James translates it as halting. In the ESV, we picture the people wavering back and forth. But in the King James, we see the idea that people are stuck in between two masters, not able to choose which one to follow. You see, in ancient cultic practices, it was not uncommon for the people to not really care about any god or gods, but rather more interested in themselves. Does this sound at all familiar to you? So instead, their actions, they would seek to appease the gods, the elements, spirits, really anything they thought might impact their crops or flocks or other means of production and wealth. In any case, it's clear that the people have divided minds, just like they were a divided nation. And there were probably some that were spiritual, but couldn't choose. And then there were some that just didn't care, and they just wanted prosperity. Now, our country is coming out of an election where we are seeing great division. Not quite to the extent of a physical separation that we see between Israel and Judah in Elijah's time, but I sense that we could be on the cusp. Now, as Christians, and I cannot stress this enough, our first and our foremost allegiance is to God. Elijah made it clear in our story that God and God alone is the true and unified power in the world, no matter what national division or even division inside a person's heart. When it was Elijah's turn at the altar, Elijah did not divide even in his offering. He used 12 stones to represent a unified people, the 12 tribes of Jacob. God had named as Israel. And lest there be any discussion as to the power and the authority of God, Elijah even stacked the deck against himself. Now in our day, Baal has hidden himself in plain sight. We refer to them as worldly standards oftentimes. But we cannot limp back and forth between the world and God. And we can't halt between God and the world and be indifferent to him. Now some might ask, why should we choose? And I think the end of Elijah's story in this passage is a great reason. In verse 38, not only did God's fire consume the offering, which I think if we were to be honest, it's what we would expect from the story, but his fire also consumed the soaked wood, the very stones upon which they sat, the dust and all around it, and even the water that was surrounding it that was left from the soaking. God went way above and beyond here. The reason we should fully give our allegiance, no matter what we see around us, to God is that God delivers way bigger than we think or even plan on. Sometimes he delivers in ways that we don't even consider. Now, I freely admit that trusting the results of God can sometimes be difficult. I don't always understand his intentions, but as I look back in my life, I've seen God deliver in some amazing ways, from my wonderful wife to even having kids, both of whom were really miracles, and even my calling into ministry. Now, while the pursuit of relationships and professions and family is certainly a common occurrence, how God delivered is not. So my encouragement to you today is to trust God as Elijah did, with full devotion and loyalty and obedience, no matter what the worldly circumstances you find yourself in. God will deliver you in unimaginable ways. God bless today.